of Public Education. It is March 1st, 2022, and we're meeting in a blended format with some of us in person at Casco Bay High School and others joining us via Zoom. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo?
Present.
Mr. Burke?
Here.
Ms. Russell Better?
Here.
Ms. Biliu?
Here.
Mr. Youssef?
Here.
Ms. Aslani? Mr. McLaughlin?
Here.
Mr. Alzamili? Ms. Santiago?
Here.
Ms. Diu?
Here.
And Chair Figdor.
Here. Excellent. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Portland Public Schools recognizes the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand. The Wolastoqiyik, or Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, collectively known as the Wabanaki Confederacy, or people of the Dawnland. We are honored to have Wabanaki children among our students today, and as a district, we are committed to making the past, present, and future of Wabanaki peoples visible in our schools and classrooms. With that, we are going to move to public comment, as is customary at the beginning of our meetings. So any member of the public who would like to address the board, you have 3 minutes. And if you're here tonight to talk about the appointment of a new principal at Lincoln Middle School, this would be the time for you to make a comment, as we do not have public comment during our consideration of personnel items. So if you are a member of the public and would like to address the board, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. You'll have 3 minutes, and please begin by stating your name and the street on which you live. All right, I do not see any public comment. So I'm going to wait just another moment. Okay, I don't see any hands up. So I'm going to close public comment and move to the report of the chair. And tonight, first, I know that many of our seniors are starting to hear from colleges. And so I want to congratulate our seniors on their achievements, and not just our seniors, but the community that has enabled their success. So thank you to all of our staff and families and broader community. March is Women's History Month, and one of my, a memory that I will never forget as a board member was a couple of years ago, we did a forum with our students of color, and I heard several of our female students of color talk about how they have learned a lot about history, but not their history. And so I know we have, we're doing the work, but we have much more work to do to decenter white men in our teaching, in history and throughout our curriculum, and not just this month, but throughout the school year. So just want to recognize that as we begin Women's History Month. Our next meeting kicks off our budget process. And as I've mentioned in my chair remarks previously, this is going to be a tough budget year. I want to encourage the community to be involved. It's going to be a tough budget year for a variety of reasons. I know that to the extent that the community is involved, that we will have a stronger budget at the end of our process. So wanted to just put on people's radar screens that we have public hearings before our finance committee. This is the school board's finance committee on March 21st, and then before the full school board on March 29th. So again, the first public hearing on our budget is before our finance committee on March 21st. and then before the full school board on March 29th. Of course, after the school board passes the budget, it will go to the city council for review and then to the voters. I know this process can be very complicated and hard to follow and hard to be an active participant in as a member of the public. There are many steps in it. And that brings me to my last, and I want to encourage people to be involved to the extent that you can, regardless, because we need your active involvement. But that does bring me to my last item for my report tonight, which is that tomorrow night, the Charter Commission's Education Committee is meeting, and they are considering alternative governance structure for our budget that would move us from this very cumbersome three-step process where the school board approves the budget and then the city council and then the voters to a two-step process where the school board approves gives conditional approval to the budget and then the voters have the final say. So for anyone who is interested in seeing a more transparent process and one in which members of the public can more easily engage and participate, and that recognizes the leadership and expertise of the superintendent and his team, as well as the school board as the elected officials who oversee education in our city, public education. Please come and join us at that meeting tomorrow night. It's at 6 p.m. and the Zoom link is available on the city's website under the Charter Commission's information about the Charter Commission. And you can email me. I'll send you the Zoom link. So that's it for my comments tonight. And next we move to the report of the students. And tonight we have Jody Dew of Portland Adult Education. And not only is this Jody's first report, but it's also her birthday. So Jody, happy birthday. And thank you so much for sharing your report on your birthday.
Thank you. Hi, I'm going to be talking about Portland Adult Education. As Portland Adult Education is different from the other schools represented by the student representative, I wanted to take the extra time to tell you what PAE has to offer. Portland Adult Education can be broken down into 5 categories: English for speakers of other languages, the High Set and High School Diploma Program, the New Maine Resource Center, the Workforce Training Programs, and Enrichment Program. Tonight, I'm going to focus on the first 4. As you know, the pandemic has caused havoc on learning, and PAE has no exception. Pre-pandemic enrollment numbers were much greater, though Portland Adult Education has definitely adapted. Currently, there are 1,236 students who attend the winter term at Portland Adult Education. 497 students meet for face-to-face learning, 567 meet remotely, and 173 meet in a hybrid format. The intake test is the first step to the English for speakers of other languages program. Portland Adult Education has conducted 1,036 intake sessions for English language learners since July of 2021. The number of students waiting for English classes is difficult to estimate precisely because the lives of new arrivals to Portland are unpredictable and complicated, and people often need to stabilize necessities like food and housing before they can commit to a class. Portland Adult Education keeps a list of any student who have expressed interest in getting into the English as a second language learner class and who have come in for an intake, and that list currently has more than 300 students on it. However, many students have been on that list since fall of 2021, and often our outreach staff have not been able to reach them. Some may have found classes in other programs, and some may have left the area. There are 156 students who have been on the waiting list since the winter term, and 46 who are newly on the list for the spring term. English language classes range from literacy, the low beginner level, to levels L1 through L5, L5 being the most advanced. English for speakers of other languages had 901 students registered, with 19% withdrawing, for a total of 730 students. After level 5, English language learners can enroll in English language arts classes. There are currently 217 students enrolled in language arts and math classes. Portland Adult Education offers 2 routes to gain a diploma. What in days past was called a GED, or General Equivalency Diploma, is now called HiSET. The principle is still the same. You take exams and get your high school equivalency diploma. There are currently 55 students in the HiSET program. The other route to obtaining a diploma is to take classes and earn credits, just like in high school. Classes are offered in subjects including math, science, and social studies. When you have enough credits, you're able to graduate with your diploma. There are currently 175 students in the high school diploma program. These 2 programs are the only Portland adult education programs that have had the same numbers of registered and active students. The new Maine Resource Center is very special in that it caters to foreign trained professionals trying to navigate the often tricky U.S. workforce market. Services range from obtaining records from home countries like high school diplomas and college transcripts. Participants in the new Mainer Resource Center can get help with a wide range of services, including career guidance, individualized professional, career, and educational plans, Maine licensing requirements, professional networking, as well as assistance with credentials, evaluations, and professional licensing. The New Mainers Resource Center is currently helping 306 individuals, with 183 new to the program and 123 people who were returning. The last program I'm going to talk about tonight is the Workforce Training Program. Portland Adult Education offers many certificate programs. For the healthcare sector, they offer 2 certified nursing assistance program with 1 CNA program specifically geared towards English language learners. They also offer a healthcare office and patient services certificate, or HOPS, as well as in the business sector, opportunities like a bookkeeping certificate and an office clerk certificate. Portland Adult Education also offers bank teller training as well as Educator Academy. There are currently 262 students in the Workforce Training Program. I want to end my presentation on a personal note and tell you how I found out about Portland Adult Education. I had previously known that Portland Adult Education offered great enrichment classes, and when I received the brochure in the mailbox, I decided to look up classes. I was a little bored, and I happened to go through the brochure cover to cover, and there was a section towards the back that really intrigued me. It was about the HOP certificate. I had no idea that Portland Adult Education offered programs like that. I haven't worked outside the home in 24 years. I was busy raising 4 children and tending to my health. I am so thankful that I was bored that day and learned about Portland Adult Education and their wonderful programs. I feel confident that I will be able to return to the workforce with all the skills I need to be successful. Thank you to Portland Adult Education, and thank you to the school board for recognizing how important it is to invest in adult learners' future. I am personally extremely thankful that you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dio, and thank you for weaving in your own personal story. It brings to life the work of Portland Adult Education. So thank you so much, and we hope you have a happy birthday. And with that, I'm going to turn to the superintendent for his report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations, Ms. Theo, on a great first report. And again, thank you for highlighting how Portland Adult Ed makes a difference in the lives of Portlanders. So appreciate that. Congratulations are in order for former Board of Education member Mark Balfons, who has been nominated by Governor Mills to serve on the Maine State Board of Education. Mark distinguished himself during his term on the board for being a thoughtful listener and an avid learner, and I'm excited to have his voice and perspective on the State Board of Ed. Mark's confirmation hearing is scheduled for March 7th. The Education Committee of the Charter Commission, as you heard earlier, is scheduled to meet this coming Wednesday. So that's tomorrow, to hear comments and vote on a set of proposals for education management and governance. The proposal by Commissioner Houston is most closely aligned with the board's formal recommendations to the commission. And so I hope that you all attend and support that proposal. Last Wednesday, I attended the City Council's Finance Committee meeting to discuss our CIP request. The city manager endorsed our CIP request with the message that we would continue to work together to identify an additional $1 million in non-bonded funds to support our proposal. This could include accessing our existing capital reserve or revising our state revolving renovation fund request to allow use of bond proceeds for PHS's roof and fund the HVAC projects using ESSER funds. I'm grateful to the City Manager West and City Finance Director O'Connell for their thoughtful partnership and collaboration on this important effort to ensure that we have the necessary resources to keep up with our many building needs. Our pre-K lottery will close later this week on March 4th, and kindergarten registration started yesterday. I urge all families with students who will be 4 or 5 years old by July 1st to take advantage of this early opportunity to register their children for school. I also want to remind the board and members of the public that we will be hosting a community budget forum on Monday, March 7th at 6:30 p.m., and that will be on Zoom. This event has traditionally been hosted by our Public Affairs Committee as an opportunity to remind residents of key aspects of our budget process, including the timeline, the funding sources, and preview this year's condition ahead of the formal beginning of the budget process, which will be at our next official board meeting on March 15th. I hope that many residents will take this opportunity to engage and understand what, as you heard earlier from Chair Figdor, will undoubtedly be a challenging budget environment. Next, I would like to begin our regular update on how we're working to keep our schools open, safe, and our staff and students healthy. As we've been doing for the past year and a half now, we provide a comprehensive update on our school reopening plans at the board meeting. And today's update, again, will be fairly brief in keeping with the decreased incidence of COVID in our schools and community and the maturity of our mitigation efforts. As we've been doing since the winter break, we continue to look at our case counts, our staffing levels, and make decisions about continuity of instruction based on those data points. Today's report is based on a single week. Normally it's based on a couple of weeks in recognition of the February break last week. So I'll begin by updating you on the student counts. During our last report, or I guess maybe not. Maybe I'm out of sequence here. So heading into break, our student attendance continued to improve with the exception of the last day before break, where we did see a fairly significant decline. And the same was true for our staff. So if you can go to the staff attendance. So again, this is showing the staff attendance for that period with, which is also what we showed you for our students. Do we have the case counts next, or am I completely?
Yeah, they're next.
Yeah, okay. So as you can see, the data here is on incidence of cases across grades. The general trend continues to be consistently down, and there are no discernible patterns that would give us cause for concern at this time. And then here's a comparison to the county, and for the second consecutive report, past slides showed you our case count dropping more than what the county was dropping, but you can see now that it's catching up at the county level as well, which of course is good news. We only had 15 positive pools the week before break. And for the second consecutive report, there were no classes where there were positives for 2 consecutive weeks, a minimum of 5 positive cases in the class over that period. and a second week where the number of positive cases trended higher. And I'm happy to continue to report that we do not have any classroom closures at this time. On the testing front, we have successfully put in place testing solutions for all but our full high school enrollment. We continue to seek applicants for our nursing aid positions to enable us to scale up that level of testing. As you know, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control noted last week that schools could discontinue the use of masks in locations that were at low risk of COVID transmission. The Maine CDC has not, as of yet, adjusted its standard operating procedures document, although we expect that they will do so in short. I believe that the governor is making an announcement, maybe even as we speak. At this time, we continue to require masks and will do so for the foreseeable future. I am, like everyone else, anxious to put COVID behind us. However, I do not want to rush to undo our mitigation practices that have allowed us to run schools safely for all of this year. Once we're able to return to increased outdoor time, including outdoor meals, we will be in a position to revisit the masking requirement. We have, however, begun to take some steps to roll back some of our COVID protocols. We've indicated to staff that they no longer need to keep class seating charts and that they're free to reorganize their space to meeting their learning needs. We are currently not reopening our water fountains at this time, mostly out of concern about students congregating unmasked around them, but our bottle fillers continue to be operational as they have been throughout the pandemic. Again, I know that everyone's tired and anxious to get back to normal. We have been able to keep schools safe for students and staff by listening to our medical advisors, and we will continue to do so going forward. And that concludes my report.
Thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent. Are there questions for the superintendent? Board Member Burke.
I just have one related to any changes in protocols like the water fountains that you mentioned. I was alerted that not all libraries are lending audiobooks again, in part because some buildings were holding on to a protocol that the headphones weren't a sanitary item to be passed around. So just in case that hasn't been brought to your attention, wanted to raise it to be addressed.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Burke. Are there other questions from the board? Ms. Bondo, I can never see you right there.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I just want to get some update on the transportation. How are we doing on the transportation with drivers and all the road touching? Yeah, this is the wood.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, all right. So that's the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
thank you.
So far, so good. We are, we have been able to run all of our routes for weeks before the break, and Monday, Tuesday have gone fine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. I don't see other questions from the board, so thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent, for your report tonight. Next, we are moving on to the report of the secretary. Consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of our February 15th, 2022 meeting.
Chair, we don't have the minutes. My assistant was out for the last couple of weeks, and so they have not.
I see that. Okay, so we will move consideration of those minutes to our next meeting on the 15th. And we'll move right into our board focus for the evening. This is our board focus on educational issues. And tonight, the board focus is an update on special education funding formulas and program needs. Mr. Superintendent, are you going to introduce this?
Just very briefly, tonight we have a board focus that's an update on special education programming as it currently stands and our plans for next year. This is the last, obviously, of a series of updates leading up to our budget presentation. As I mentioned earlier, we are fast approaching the rollout of the FY23 budget. And so I'm going to turn this over to Assistant Superintendent Nally and Director of Student Services, Jesse Applegate, to walk through tonight's presentation.
We're just going to get the presentation up on the screen. So give us 1 second, please. And then Aaron, will you just bring it over to me? Sorry. Okay, well, I can briefly introduce and get us going. Good evening, everyone. So mostly I'm here to introduce Jesse Applegate, who's here. Thanks, Aaron. Okay, perfect. So Jesse, I'm not sure if you all have met him, but he's our Director of Student Support Services. He's in his second year in his position. He stepped into this incredibly complex position right, I think, a couple days before we started school last year. So he's helped to shepherd us through hybrid learning and a return to in-person learning. And I just wanted to say about Jesse that he brings a really strong commitment to inclusion, to collaborating closely with colleagues who are overseeing both our Tier 1 instruction and behavioral health continuum. And he's been especially focused in these last 2 years on navigating how we support the students in our district programs, who we think of as some of our most vulnerable students. So he'll be joined by a handful of the amazing special educators across the district who are, I think, going to be zooming in here to highlight a few examples of what this work looks like in action. And I'll let Jesse introduce those folks when it comes to that. And then I also just wanted to mention, while they aren't presenting this evening, I did want to acknowledge both of our assistant directors, Julie Kirby, as well as Aaron Bates-Laterno. They both work tirelessly in support of this department and our students with disabilities across the district. So our aims for this evening are here. First, we just want to give a brief overview of the current state of special education in the Portland schools. Secondly, like I mentioned, we'll highlight a sample of programs and priorities that fall within this department. And then finally, we wanted to wrap it up by highlighting some of the resource investments we see as needs in the upcoming school year. So with that, I'll pass it to you, Jesse, and I'll do the slides, okay?
Hey everybody, it's great to be with you tonight. I'm really glad to have the opportunity to share some of the work that we're doing here in the district. So we'll get right into it. I wanted to share a bit about the population of students with IEPs. So here, this graph, you can see that we have 1,136 students with IEPs total that we serve. The vast majority of those students are served in our schools. And then the remaining students are served either they're in private schools where they've been, placed by their parents, or we service a very small number of students in special purpose private schools for students with, very significant needs. So for some kind of broader context, especially given that we know the population of the district has been declining, I did want to show that, in fact, while that's happened, the number of students with IEPs has actually been increasing. So you can see that we've gone up each year the last several years. Now, as I said, 1,136 students total. And of course, because the population has been declining, that means that the percentage of students with IEPs in the district has also climbed even more so, right? So now, currently this year, we have over 17% of students in the district have IEPs. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, so I also wanted to share that the number of referrals to special education has overall been increasing. There's a little dip there 2 years ago. That's largely because of schools being shut for COVID. So overall, that's an upward trend. At the same time, though, the percentage of these referrals being made by parents is actually declining, which means that more and more of our referrals are being made by school teams. And then the last piece of the referrals is, so the students are referred, and then there's a process, of course, to determine their eligibility for special education. So what we're seeing is that while the number of referrals has gone up, the percentage of students that actually end up being found eligible for services is, of those students, that percentage is going down. You can see several years ago, it was much higher. Yeah, the next slide's great, thank you. Okay, so I wanted to share some thoughts on why we're seeing this increase in the number of referrals and students with IEPs. So first of all, this is a national trend for sure. Over the last 10 plus years, the average percentage across the country of students with IEPs has increased from 13.1% up to 14.4% as of the school year 1920. But I also want to put that in a little more local context. So currently, Portland, I mentioned, is at 17.4%. That actually puts us below the average in Maine. Maine is at 19.2% as of 1920. With that said, Maine is actually the second highest percentage of any state in the country, behind only New York. So we're below that, but we are well above that 14.4%. So, just a little bit of additional context there. So why is this? So some ideas on this. One is that, we have a need in our schools for additional interventions, and, special education is seen as, or referrals to special education are seen as a way for students to access additional intervention. And so that's, something that's happening. And, you can look at the lower percentage of eligibility and think about what that means about our, our intervention processes and in the schools. Also, certainly, we suspect the pandemic has had an impact. Students were not fully in school, of course, for a long period of time, many students. And so how that, plays out is complex, but we think that has an impact. And then I did also want to mention that, the number of students that are actually being identified in pre-K, so they're coming to kindergarten with IEPs, appears to be increasing significantly. So that's likely another factor as well into why we see this number going up. So this graph shows you the most prevalent disabilities in the district. I think suffice to say, this lines up in terms of our, our most common disabilities. This lines up with national numbers. Specific learning disability, speech and language impairment, and other health impairment are the three largest groups, and that's true nationally as well. So here we've disaggregated the population of students with IEPs by race. And so that's on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side are the demographics of the district in its entirety. And so what you'll notice here is that it's actually quite consistent. The percentages are very close to each other, mostly off by a few percentage points. You'll see, for example, that we have about 29% of students in the district are Black, and then 23% of students with IEPs are Black. So that's the biggest difference between the numbers that we have. But overall, very, very similar. I also want to take a moment to talk about dually identified students who have IEPs, but also are English learners. So what we're seeing is that actually these students are also proportionally represented in the IEP population, meaning roughly 25% of students in the district are L students, and that's true of students with IEPs as well. However, with that said, the percentage of, so we'd expect from that, right, that the percentage of students who are referred, it would be about 25% of those students are L students. And you can see here that that number is more like 36%. So these students are being referred at a higher rate than their peers. And this just speaks to, I think, something I want to touch on, which is we have a new role that currently this year in the district, the dual identified coordinator. And a lot of the work that we're doing around that is about helping, supporting a district approach to distinguishing between language needs and disability. And so that's really, I think, speaks to the need for that position. And then I just wanted to share a couple other data points here. So looking at attendance, this is a snapshot of recent attendance for students with IEPs compared to students without. You'll see that it's on an average, students with IEPs are attending about, the percentage is about 3% lower for attendance with students with IEPs. And it's closer at the elementary level, and then there's more of a distinction at the middle and high school levels. So this shows the suspensions of students with and without IEPs. So what you'll see is that 17% of students in the district have IEPs, but those students account for almost 50%, almost half, 45% of suspensions in the district. And then this is also the achievement data. So comparing again, student proficiency. And you can see that there's a substantial gap between students, between the general population and students with disabilities as well there. Great. Okay, so I'd also, now having shared that, would like to talk a bit about the services that, we're providing and how we think about providing services to students with IEPs. So a couple key pieces here, right? Referenced this earlier, but the idea that students should receive robust intervention prior to being referred to special education, all students. We believe that students should participate in the general education setting as much as possible. And we also believe that students should receive services at their home school to the extent possible. So here, this shows you how much time students are spending in general education to that point. So of the 1,060 students that are in, that we're serving in our schools, the majority of them, about 2/3, are in what we're calling the general education placement, meaning that they're in general education over 70% of the time. Then then 23% of them are in at the resource placement, meaning range of 40 to 70% of the time in general education, and the remaining 9% in what's called the special class setting. So those are students who are only in general education less than 40% of the time. And to give a little more context on that, so students in that general education placement are typically, receiving services in general education, meaning push-in services in the classroom. So they do sometimes, get served in a separate location as well, but many services are in the classroom. At the resource level, many of those students still do receive services in general education, but more typically would be served in a separate location through, being pulled out for their services. And then the special class placement largely are specialized programs. So students who are in a small class, those students still will access general education classes, but they will spend most of their time and get most of their services in that small separate class. And I want to talk about the specialized programs that we offer as well. So we have the Beach program, which serves students with autism who also have significant behavioral support and often functional support, and the functional life skills, the FLS program, for students with substantial developmental disabilities. Both of these programs are small classes. And we offer at least one classroom, have one classroom available for these programs at each grade span as of this year. We also have the Breathe program. So there's two parts of the Breathe program. So one is the day treatment program, which is also self-contained. It's therapeutic programming for students with significant emotional needs, trauma-related needs. And then Breathe Support, which takes that therapeutic programming concept and supports students in accessing general education. So students who are in the Breathe Support program are spending a lot of their time in general education, but with those resources to support them. And then we have what we call the Functional Academics program, which is self-contained small class. This is only at the middle and high school level. and it's specialized programming for students who really need to be spending most of their time in that small class setting. These students will, as I mentioned earlier, they will access general education, but most of the time, the baseline is most of the time is spent in a small class setting. And then beyond those special education services, our department provides many other services as well. So, speech and occupational therapy and physical therapy. We have board certified behavior analysts, BCBAs. Of course, psychologists who do conduct evaluations. And then our department also encompasses, these last two are not special education per se, but also encompasses the Chapter 104, also known as Gifted and Talented program, which serves 322 students in grades 4 through 8 who are identified for the program. And then also our department includes, the nursing services that we provide at every school. Okay, so now we're going to take the opportunity, like Malia said, to highlight a few pieces of the work that we're doing. So the first person and will they be able to just jump in? Okay, great. So the first person that I'd like to introduce is Jacob Markowitz. Jacob is a special educator and the special education liaison at Lyman Moore Middle School. And Jacob is going to be talking to us, about the co-teaching that is happening and has happened at Lyman Moore. So we spoke earlier about the idea that students should be served as much as possible in the general education setting. And so therefore we want to see students getting their services in that setting as much as possible. And co-teaching, while it's not a practice that, we're doing consistently across the district as of yet, we do provide a lot of services in the setting, but the co-teaching model specifically is one that brings a lot of value for students to really be able to engage in general education classes. So I'm going to hand it over to Jacob to talk a little bit about what that's looked like at Lyman Moore Middle School.
All right. As Jesse said, I'm Jacob Markowitz. I work at Lyman Moore Middle School. And in case anyone's not aware, the basic premise of a co-taught class is it is a general education teacher and a special education teacher that teach a class together. And one of the key pieces of that is it also includes having time to plan together. And we made this switch to trying to do as much co-teaching as possible a few years ago at Lyman Moore. And it's been challenging. It's definitely not all easy, but overall it has been very successful. The picture on your screen is of a co-taught language arts class that I taught with Tyler Jellison. That had a great mix of students with IEPs as well as without. One of the biggest positive aspects of a co-taught classroom is its ability to provide differentiated instruction to a wide range of students so that they can all access grade level content. Because of having two teachers in the room that both know the students as well as the curriculum, you're able to provide different levels of support. And this is targeted for students with IEPs, but it also can be majorly beneficial to students without IEPs. This can include really supporting ELL students as well, who might benefit from some additional support or a slower pace that we can provide. Working with a teacher every day allows you to build on the principles of co-teaching and try out new techniques or strategies. You're able to kind of toy with different ideas to see what works best for a group. One of the main things we're able to do is split into smaller groups. And so we can alternate as well, though, who takes that smaller group. There are times where I'll take a small group to work with, but alternatively, there are times where I'll stay with the classroom group that is working more independently, and the general ed teacher who really has a higher level of content knowledge will take the small group to work with them as well. And my own personal experience with co-teaching, and the reason I've kind of believe in it so much is the success I saw. There's a group of students who are now juniors, and for 6th grade and 7th grade, I worked with them in a small specially designed instruction numeracy class. So there was a group of 5 kids who were in my room with me as the teacher for math every day. As you can imagine, there's some great benefits to teaching a small group like that, but there's also some really big challenges. And once we moved into a co-taught class, we joined Megan McDevitt in 8th grade and we co-taught together. And it was really great to see the students now have positive role models who they're able to look up to and kind of see as an example of what an engaged student looks like in math. The students became way more engaged themselves with the learning. Students had opportunities to see themselves as successful and on the same academic level as their peers. And they increased their self-confidence and self-esteem as they see themselves as equals to their peers instead of being in a special class per se. All right, back to you, Jesse.
Hey, thanks, Jacob. Appreciate it. Next up, we want to share about some work that we're doing. And this is a little bit different. This is not just a special education initiative. This is in partnership with the clinical and behavioral support team around de-escalation training. So over the last couple of years, we've been thinking about our approach in schools, to crisis intervention and management, and balancing the need to have teams in each school that are trained for various interventions, up to and including physical restraint, though that's something that should be incredibly rare. Recently, actually, there's a law passed in the state further limiting the use of restraint and seclusion in schools. So in that context, we've been rethinking this approach, and we've decided to make a shift to a new training program, and the name of that program is the CPI training, the Crisis Prevention Institute. There's several reasons for it, but the premise of it is that we want to shift the focus away as much as possible from things like physical restraint and really think about how we can be trauma informed and how we can work on de-escalation as a way to manage these things. So this initiative is just beginning. We're about to start the process of training school teams in this new model, and we'll be rolling out more de-escalation training to school staff next year as well. But the work around de-escalation and trauma-informed practices is not new either. So I've invited Chris Salamone, who is a social worker at Talbot, to present briefly about the work that he and his colleagues are doing at Talbot in this vein. And so, Chris, please go ahead and share with us.
Thanks, Jesse. And first of all, I just want to say that I'm thrilled that you and administration has made it a priority to increase and improve staff training regarding trauma-informed crisis management procedures. For the past 5 or 6 years, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of students who come to school scared, angry, having a difficult time concentrating or sitting still. And these same students are easily triggered, easily without the correct intervention could end up in a restraint or seclusion. And I want to give you an example, and I'm going to use an example that I want to highlight the level of despair that some of our students are coming to school with and how difficult it is for staff to be able to know how to intervene with such students who carry such trauma. So a couple of years ago, I had a first grade teacher come to me and show me a picture that a new student had drawn. And it was one of the most graphic pictures that I've seen in my 40 years as a social worker. Very disturbing to look at. And the student had clearly seen things that nobody should have to witness, never mind a first grade student. And I brought him down to my office, and he sat next to me, and we looked at the picture, and he began to cry. And he didn't know me, but he leaned up against me and was crying inconsolably. And I put my arm around him, and he started to bite his arm because he was trying to get himself to stop crying, and he was in such pain. We looked at the picture together, and I noticed with him that a lot of the people in the picture looked really frightened. And I said to him, I said, I wonder if there's a way we can help these people feel less scared. And so we talked about what if they moved way, way far away from the bad people? Would that help? And he shook his head, yes. And then we decided to build a fort. We thought the fort would provide some safety. We put double force field around it, triple force field. It was probably the safest fort I've ever been involved with, to be honest with you. And we sat in the fort and we ate cheese puffs. And for that moment, he felt safer. And for about a week afterward, he kept coming down my office, wanting to get more cheese puffs. And I was flattered because I felt like he was beginning to feel safe and we were forming a connection. But then it was about a week after that I got a call to respond to a crisis that was happening outside of room 105. And I went down the hallway and there was this little first grade student that had wedged himself between two lockers and was screaming and crying. And he was swearing and throwing books and yelling at staff. But the staff that were there were well trained. And they were not responding to the fact that there were books being thrown at them and insults being wielded their way. But their body language was calm. Their tone of voice was soothing and reassuring. Their words were encouraging. And the student began to calm after a period of time. And I went down and saw him because we had a connection. He jumped up at one point and jumped into my arms and he started to cry. And his heart rate was racing 100 miles an hour. He clearly was terrified. And I, realized at that point, just again, the level of despair that many of our students are bringing with them to school. And they were asking our teachers to be able to respond to them appropriately without a lot of training or support. So when the district started to look at, and Jesse started looking at CPI, which is a much more trauma-informed program, and looking at different ways to spread this training across the district, both in elementary school, middle school, and high schools, I welcome that. I think it's a terrific initiative. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for sharing that. So the next highlight that I'd like to share is focused on our newest. Can we go to the next one? Oh, okay. I will. That's no problem. So the next highlight that I'd like to share is actually about our newest district program, which is called the RISE program, and this was we put into place this year in response to a new directive from the state DOE for districts to serve for students to have eligibility, I should say, up until age 22. Previously, eligibility in Maine was only until the end of the year in which students turn 20. So this change is really, I think, positive. It's keeping Maine more in line with what's done in other states across the country. But it is a new need for us, and so we established this program. And because it's new and it's a new need, I thought it would be a good opportunity to share a little bit more about, what we're doing in that program now with these students who are, the oldest students in the district. Students are only in this program when they have significant needs and need additional support making that transition to adult life. And then it occurred to us that it would also be helpful, I think, to hear just a little bit about, in general, what transition services look like for students with IEPs across the district, not just in this program. So I've invited Nancy Peavy, who is our transition strategist. She supports school teams and parents and families and students in making transition plans, in accessing these resources. Works all across the district to share a little bit about that. And then I've also invited Jessie Muldoon, who is the teacher in the RISE program specifically, to talk a little bit more about the work that she's doing with her students as well. So Nancy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Right. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'll share a brief overview of special education transition services. Beginning at age 16, every student in special ed has a transition plan as part of their IEP. Transition planning focuses on goals for life after high school and helping students transition successfully to adult life. Transition plans address three main areas: post-secondary ed or training, career/employment, and independent living. Transition planning is very individualized depending on the interests, strengths, and needs of the student. Many special ed students have a large support team in high school, and this ends at graduation. Students and families are often unaware of community services available to them after high school. Transition planning is a bridge from school to resources and services in the community that they may need, such as home supports, case managers, day programs, benefits such as Social Security, vocational rehabilitation and employment supports, and student support services in college. Transition planning in school also includes skills instruction, especially related to work. I coordinate a work program for students in the functional life skills and functional academics programs at Deering High School. As part of their school day, students go to work sites in the community with their support staff. It's been a challenge with the pandemic, but some of the places we have students working are Flatbread Pizza, World Gym, Ashton Gardens Retirement Living, Goodwill, the Barron Center Assisted Living, and Deering Center Community Church. So most students will have worked at 5 or 6 different job sites by graduation. And by the time they graduate, they will have some solid work skills and some specific job goals.
Thanks, Nancy. And Jesse, please share with us about the RISE program specifically.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for having us here. I'm Jessie Muldoon. I'm the RISE teacher, which is housed at Deering High School. People regularly ask me what the RISE program is. So to start with, RISE stands for Reaching Independence Through Support and Education. It's brand new to the district. It's in its first year. It's a work in progress. And so it's understandable that most people don't know what it is that we do. So I thought I'd give just a couple of little examples and a little bit of information about what we do in RISE. In RISE, every student's schedule is different, and that's how it should be. It's highly individualized, and it's driven by the student's transition plan. Most of my students have come from the functional academics, from functional academics, or from functional life skills, and may well have been in these special ed programs for most, if not their entirety of their school career. Students in RISE attend TOPS, which is a life skills program in South Portland, or PATHS, or both. And another component of the program is work experience. And I want to give an example of a RISE student who has been very successful this year, and I think could be a model for what the RISE program should be. She's in her 6th year of high school and had the opportunity this fall to work at a retirement center supported by an ed tech. She was there twice a week. It was a great experience for her to have this opportunity outside of the classroom. She'd come to school really excited to go to work. Sometimes she would dress up, and she'd report back to us when she returned. She did a variety of jobs during her placement, but I think the one that she most enjoyed was decorating the facility for the holidays, including making handmade ornaments. Having this experience gave her independence. It was rewarding, but it also provided the support that she needed to be able to do the job. I think she's a good example of what the RISE program can be. She had opportunities to be in the community, to go to work, attend TOPS, and she also has services and case management through Deering. Ideally, any RISE student would have that balance of transition planning, continued development of independent living skills, programming at PATHS and or TOPS, and individualized case management. RISE gives students a little extra time to continue with the support and structure of school while they work on the goals in their transition plans, while they prepare for work and adult services, and otherwise prepare for life after high school. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jesse. Yeah, please.
Great. Great. Next up is Breathe Support, and I'm going to introduce Katrin Monahan, who's here as well, who I'm really happy is here with us this evening. And she's going to do a little highlight on the Breathe Support work. But before I pass it off to her, I just wanted to briefly remind or ground you in how we came to have the Breathe Support continuum in our elementary schools. So you may recall several years ago, we were hearing lots of concerns from our day treatment team who was operating out of the bottom floor of the central office in what we called at the time the Bayside program. People were concerned about the location. They had some concerns and questions about the model itself. And so this prompted us at the time to start a work group that was representative of roles, grade spans, and also included outside experts. And the charge of the work group was to just deeply understand the strengths and the weaknesses of the program and to ultimately assert recommendations for how to improve it. So a lot of good work came out of that team, and we've been taking action on the recommendations over the past several years. Some of this has included moving the day treatment program into the buildings, adding more social workers to the program, including a clinical lead. And then there was a big move to build out more of a full and complete continuum of services from the least to the most restrictive setting. So this last move stemmed from a big aha that happened in the work group when we realized that about half the students in the program at that time did not need a fully self-contained day treatment program, but they also were not going to be successful in a full inclusion setting. And we observed that we had a more complete continuum for the secondary students, but we did not for the elementary students. There was either day treatment or full inclusion. And so this prompted the creation of this Breathe Consulting and Breathe Support K through 12. And so Katrin is the lead teacher in one of the Breathe Support classrooms over at Rowe Elementary, and she'll share a little bit about how that work is going as of today. So go ahead, Katrin, if you're here.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be speaking with you and to highlight what we're doing over at Rowe and Breathe Support. It's our third year. We're chugging right along. And I'm obviously really proud of what we're doing. But in the spirit of centering my students and my family's voices, I wanted to take a moment to kind of share their thoughts. So I was able over the last day or so in preparation for this to kind of talk to my students and my families, as well as some of my colleagues. And I just wanted to share their thoughts here. So this morning I spoke with one of my students who's a fifth grader, and her first year in a general education school was last year. It was her first time ever in a general education environment. She had been at day treatment before that, working through some trauma and working on making safe choices. And her graduation party for Breathe Support is on Friday. It's unicorn themed, and I'm very excited. And when I asked her if Breathe Support at Rowe had impacted her in any way, she said, yes, I have friends now, and I didn't before. And also, I'm not weird. I'm a unicorn. That's pretty great. I was able to ask a couple of my previous students who have moved from the elementary Breathe up through the middle school Breathe continuum, as well as their families, the same question. And my middle schoolers said, the teachers are cool and helpful. It's a nice, quiet space to work and go when things get hard. And one of my parents said, Breathe saw my child as an individual. They learned what she loved and what triggered her. They created tools and strategies that met her needs. She always felt loved, supported, and seen. I asked two colleagues at Rowe, ed techs, who are the backbone of our program, and they said these two quotes. Breathe is more than developing individual coping skills. It utilizes transformative justice and restorative practice to transform the school world around a student so they don't have to cope with their education, but can thrive in it. It's beyond social emotional learning. It's social emotional justice. And the other staff said, I love working in Breathe because we just love love. We get to see and share love and respect with our students, and in turn, them with others and themselves. And then I was able to speak with our administrators here at Rowe, who said embedding a district behavior support program into an elementary school setting means that we all get to learn and see modeled the social, emotional, and behavioral tools and strategies that benefit students in the Breathe continuum. The adage, what is good for the minority is good for the majority, holds true here. Strong SEB curriculum, trauma-informed practices, co-regulation strategies, and relationship-based teaching are all examples of what is good, not just for Breathe students, but for all students. And lastly, in morning meeting this morning, I asked my current class of students what they wanted me to share. One wanted to pose for the picture that you see on your screen. He got under the blanket and said, show them what I do when I get mad. So there he is, doing what he does when he gets mad, which is a really great strategy we've worked on for a few years. And they said, I love it. I'm happy. I like the quiet space. And our friend picture here said, sometimes I used to get mad and run away, but now I use Breathe to calm myself down. And I feel happy about that. So I really appreciate your time, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Katrin. So inspirational. I love going to a morning meeting in her classroom. It's the best. I highly recommend it. And so finally, I'm just going to briefly highlight the fact that we're in the midst of running work groups for two of our other district programs, Beach and Bridge/FLS. And these are modeled off of the successful approach we used for Breathe. Much like the Breathe work group, we have a mix of people representing roles, grade spans, and perspectives, in addition to outside expert consultants. Our charge for both of these teams is to ground ourselves in the current state of the program, as well as in the current evidence-based practices in the field for these types of programs, and then to evaluate the program's strengths and weaknesses relative to evidence-based practice. This analysis is then intended to lead to a set of recommendations for ways to build upon strengths in the programs and to address gaps in needs. The scope of the recommendations cover everything from curriculum to staffing to physical space, materials, climate and culture, and so on. So it's really intended to be comprehensive. The Beach Work Group is going to be finalizing its recommendations this coming Thursday, and the Bridge and FLS team will finalize its recommendations more toward the end of April. Jesse's going to share in a moment that we do anticipate some additional resource investments needs resulting from these recommendations, but they're not only about resources. Much of what we're seeing coming out of the work so far relates to staff onboarding, training and support, curriculum and schedules, ways that we structure collaboration and support for teachers who are overseeing large teams of ed techs. You heard Katrin mention that. Communication protocols, and the culture in the buildings in general as it pertains to including students in these programs and the community and so forth. And I just wanted to say I'm so grateful to all of the educators who've served on these teams. I'm personally helping to facilitate the Beach team, and I've been very impressed by and grateful for the group's deep commitment to their students in the program and their willingness to grapple with and think really creatively about how to make the program even better for the students that it's designed to serve. So I'm going to kick it back to Jesse, who's going to close us out with a look at some of the resource investments we see as needs across the student support services.
Great. So for a little context on this, this slide just shows you our current staffing. So this is for special education as a whole across the district. So 54.5 teachers, the resource level, meaning in our not in our specialized programs, and then additional 21 teachers in the district programs. We also have 153 ed techs total across all programs, all settings, and then 31.5 specialists, meaning speech, occupational therapy, psychologists, et cetera, which we mentioned earlier. So just briefly speak about how we look at special education staffing in the, again, not in the specialized programs, but at the school level typically. So we a couple years ago created this staffing formula, and the reason was that we realized that schools were requesting additional staff to meet student needs, but there wasn't a transparent system to evaluate if we needed to make additions or reallocate resources from somewhere else. So this spreadsheet or this formula is in response to that, and this is a snapshot sort of the spreadsheet. So this is not going to give you any solid data. It's just sort of give you an example of what it looks like here. But basically the premise is it's a weighted formula, and this was put together by looking at other models that are used, around the country, and this ultimately seems sort of the most appropriate for our use. So it's a weighted formula, meaning that each student is assigned a different weight based on their disability category. And so what we do is we look at, how many students the school has, and then we assign weights to each of those students based on the disability category, and we end up with a weighted number. So you could have 30 students in an elementary school, you apply the weights, it comes out to something like 40 weighted students. And then we look at staffing ratios that are based on, what makes the most sense at that, grade span, in terms of how many total staff we have, or how many, students per each staff member, in terms of how many teachers we have, in each school. And, it's based also on recommendations from, state guidance, though we are coming in below that number intentionally to give some leeway for the challenges of, not just teaching, but also case management that teachers do. And so we compare the number of staff we have, not to the number of students directly, but to the weighted number of students. And that gives us some additional leeway. And the purpose of the weight, right, is to sort of try to approximate the additional need that there is to serve each student. So that's sort of how that process works. We look at it each year or multiple times a year to sort of see where we are in staffing. And this year, what we've seen is that we do have a few schools that are actually under the number of ed techs that they need. We also have some schools that are over that number based on the formula. So we're looking at potential reallocation of some ed tech FTEs among schools to meet that need. In terms of special education teachers, we have the appropriate number at every school as of now. So investment needs that we're advocating for. So first, with the specialized programs, we are looking to add some additional ed techs to the FLS programming due to the high needs of the students, the need for most of the students to have one-to-one support the majority of the time. We're also looking to add additional support, one ed tech to the RISE program. I mentioned it's a new program. It's going to grow a bit, therefore, before it stabilizes. And so we need to provide the appropriate staffing for students to participate in those experiences that Jesse spoke about. In addition, we're proposing an additional social work position for the Breathe High School Day Treatment Program. Currently, there's a social worker serving that program as well as the Breathe Support Program also at Deering. And so that's a much larger, group of students together than we typically have for the program. So this would be to make sure the students have the social work support they need in that program. And then finally, proposing an additional ed tech for day treatment at the K-8 level for Breathe as well, to ensure that we have the staffing that we need. If right now the program is not full, so we have the appropriate staffing levels now, but the program could become full, and we want to make sure we have the right staffing for that purpose too. So that's why we would need an additional ed tech there. And then moving from that, this other category calling consultation intervention. So, we spoke earlier about, this is one example of the suspension rates in the district, the need for support around behavior. So we're proposing the addition of 2 additional board certified behavior analysts, BCBAs. These are folks who have expertise on helping schools build capacity around behavior management, on developing behavior plans, and work of that nature. Currently, the BCBAs we have on staff work basically only in the district programs. We don't have this capacity to serve schools otherwise. And so the idea would be that these folks would consult with schools and provide that additional layer of support so students could continue to be successful in the general education environment. We're also proposing 1.5 additional school psychologists, FTEs, and the reason for this is coming back to what we spoke about, around the referral process and what those numbers are looking like. And the idea here is that school psychologists, of course, conduct evaluations, and we certainly need enough school psychologists to be able to do that. But the ask here is actually based on the premise that if we were to have the appropriate level of staffing of psychologists, they could actually be more active participants in the intervention teams at the school level. And they could provide that expertise to those teams, when they're looking at interventions for students before the referral takes place. And that would be a really, I think, valuable support to schools. And it's something that psychologists are trained to do and that we have not, had them do previously because the focus has been on evaluation. So this is the premise of that. And then a couple other ones is we are looking to add currently we have a 0.8 FTE physical therapist, and we're looking to just make that a 1.0 position to ensure that we can, meet the caseload requirements that we have, and that would bring us to 3 full-time physical therapists. And it's important that they be able to, not be so spread out among so many schools, each therapist. So the proposal is just to add that little bit, would help us cover all the different needs there are at every school in the district. And then lastly, we're proposing sort of similar concept. We currently have a 0.6 FTE Chapter 104 position. We're proposing that we increase that to a 1.0 FTE position. And the rationale there would be, again, Chapter 104 teacher consultants, they spend time at multiple schools, each of them. They're meeting with teachers to consult and help them plan. They're pushing in directly to classes to serve and work with students. To do that, they need sufficient time at each school. So this increase would allow us to ensure that we have, each consultant spending 1.5 to 2 days at every school, which is really the amount of time that's needed to provide those services. And the last thing I wanted to call out here was the nursing request that's on the right-hand side of the screen. We're proposing 2 additional health assistants, continuing the 0.5 nurse at Peaks Island. Previously, it was less than that. This year, it's been 0.5. We're proposing a continuation of that. And then we're also proposing another 1-year full release of the nursing coordinator, meaning that the nursing coordinator would dedicate her time to doing the nursing coordination work. And the premise of all this, just to be clear, is the uncertain COVID environment. The idea that we all know how much additional work the nurses have taken on in the last couple of years, and not knowing exactly how that's going to change and develop, we are proposing that we keep some of these things in place, or some additional positions, so that we can continue to rely on that team to do that important work, whatever it looks like in the future. Okay, and then a couple other things, not personnel focused per se, but very important. So I wanted to talk about billing specifically for the BREATHE program. We all know that when the BREATHE program was established several years ago, as Malia mentioned, one of the concepts was that it would be paid for through billing. As we've worked in the last couple of years to actually implement that, we've hit sort of more challenges than we expected with it. And what it comes down to is that what we're asking staff to do for the billing, one is quite arduous. There's a lot of paperwork that needs to be done very specifically, very frequently, in such a way that it really requires additional oversight that we don't have. Just staff doing it. There's oversight needed for that. But the other piece of it is that the way that billing works, Maine Care billing works, is that it's really sort of more of it's not a model that really works with what a classroom actually looks like. So the idea of it is that you need one staff member spending time with one student, and not just, a little time, but significant chunks of time, 30 minutes, an hour. And, the way that our classrooms are set up, rightfully so, that just isn't what it looks like. It's much more fluid and flexible, because that's how we best meet the needs of the student. That's how we help students participate in groups, which is important for learning. So it just doesn't actually line up, this model for billing, with kind of what best practice is in classrooms. And so, that's where we sort of are, have been challenged greatly to actually, fulfill the billing that we had originally intended, to do and set out to do. And that's something that's high on the radar for sure. Additionally, I did want to mention that we have, I spoke earlier about, we have a very small number of out-of-district placements of students who are in these special purpose private schools, but these placements are, very expensive. And so the result is that we have some additional ones this year going into next year, and we anticipate it will add $300,000 to $350,000 to our operating budget. Now, some of that gets reimbursed by the state later on, but the initial outlay that we're estimating would be $300,000 to $350,000. And then we're also, proposing this. You heard me and Chris Salmoni speak about CPI training, so we're proposing roughly $30,000 to implement that, to be able to do the de-escalation training for staff in schools. And then we are also thinking about, some costs associated with, as Malia described, associated with the work groups that we're running right now. So curriculum, for example, training for staff, things of that nature will have a cost to it. And so we're also looking at potential costs associated there. And that's it. That's it for me.
So if you want to do questions or.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jesse. Very much appreciate that presentation. All right. So I'm looking at the board and I see that Ms. Bondo has a question. Ms. Bondo, please go ahead.
Thank you. And just bear with me. I have a couple of questions here. Thank you for the presentation. This is really a must needed. It's something that is really close to my heart to read those presentations and to get some updates around those amazing program for special ed. So I have a proper question for the first slide, for the first data here. When you mentioned those data here, then we have 1136 students on IEPs. So what's the meaning on those chapter 104 and 504? What's those students? Who are they?
You've
So-
taken that microphone.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, of course. So that number does not include students who are have 504 plans, and it does not include students who are identified for.
So what's the meaning? What's those? What's the mean?
What is a 504?
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay, so a 504 plan is it's basically a plan that lays out accommodations that a student needs.
Okay.
Based on like a medical health condition.
So we don't count them here. So they are not. So do we know how many we have in the district? If they are not representing here on the 1136, because
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer to that. Right now, we'll follow up on it though.
Okay, we can get an
Yeah,
answer.
absolutely, we can get that.
All right.
for you.
Thank you. So when I look at the second question on the refer here, then we talk about some of the refer decrease from the parents. Is all over across all the different grade, or mostly from the elementary school, that the pre-K entry level? Or do we know the reason? Because when I look at this, mostly increase from the school team instead of the parents. So I want to know if it's all the grade level of school, elementary school and high school to high school, or just specifically on the pre-K entry level? And what's the reason, if we know a couple of reasons why it's been so the decrease from the parents, and are the parents get involved to those kind of referrals as well?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I can say what the reason would be. And I would have to look into how the decrease breaks down across grade levels. I'm not sure, but I will say that when a referral is made, whether it's made by the parent or by the school, the team includes the parent. So parents are always, should always be very involved and totally informed of what the school team is thinking about. And of course, they're included in all the decision making. So the process looks the same, even if it's initiated by the parent versus the school. It still looks the same.
Okay, good. So on the suspension, do we have, I just wanted to understand a few suspension cases. How do we suspend the IEP's students? If you can give us some of those reasons, like a disciplinary or any kind of reason, then we have to suspend the IEPs. And if we suspend it, how far are we going for days, and are we taking care of the social emotion?
Yeah, I can speak a little to that. So, I mean, I think, students with IEPs can be suspended for, any of the reasons a student without an IEP could. What happens is that for students with IEPs, if they've been suspended for a certain amount of time, in the year, 10 days, there is then a meeting to discuss it with the IEP team, with the family. And the team then looks at potential change to the program as a result of what's happening, to be responsive to the student's needs in that way. We expect the approach to be the same, in terms of how students would be treated with discipline. But the difference is in after it happens.
Are you saying then the process should be the same with a general student in the class than IEPs? As the process can be the same?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, and you can elaborate on this, but there's the consideration of is the behavior a manifestation of the disability?
Okay. Right.
So for example, we might have a student like in a breathe program who would do something that they wouldn't get suspended for, but another student might. I mean, in general, we're trying to reduce the use of suspension as a tool in general. So I think that's where there's a distinction is you have to consider, is this behavior a manifestation of the disability when you're making decisions about what's the right consequence for the behavior. But I mean, in general, you see the data, it shows that we have a higher percent of students with disabilities that are getting suspended. So that's why we're wanting to bring transparency to that, because we have concerns, and that connects to some of these issues like the need for the BCBA consultation, which is going beyond just these programs and more generally to students outside of these really specialized programs.
Okay. So what I'm asking for, because I'm coming to my other question, is that I see that we have some trauma-informed trainings. So I try to understand on those trauma-informed training, are we adding some of the cultural approach on those trauma-informed, because we have different race in our IP's group of students. So to build a better capacity on cultural competency to try to de-escalation or any kind of situation by those cultural approach. Are we bringing those different approach to those trauma-informed training as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and it's something we talk about all the time, which is how are we creating coherence and connection between some of the strategies we're using to be trauma-informed, to be culturally responsive, PBIS, all of the different components. So that's a very active part of the dialogue. I do think CPI, as was mentioned, is a model, a national model. So I think that's something that we need to be looking closely at from our own lens, and not necessarily assuming as a lens that they are taking to the extent that it's a priority for us.
Okay. Yeah. So are we adding any assets on those training as well? The adverse childhood experiences. That one have a strong correlation and a correlation between the trauma-informed and also can go to those suspension cases. Are we thinking to add on those trauma-informed training some of those aspects on the adverse childhood experience is to learn exactly the root and the causes on those kind of trauma.
Yeah. I've actually been working with the social work team on conversations around, where is the staff and their understanding of just even the basics about, what trauma does to the brain and all that stuff. So that's absolutely something we've been doing. And lately the conversation has been taking stock of how much that knowledge and understanding is out there, which is foundational to then being able to do things like de-escalation, like Chris Salamone spoke about, with an understanding of why.
Yeah. Okay. So how many social workers we have? How many caseload we have of social workers?
So social work is sort of underneath the Department of Behavioral and Mental Health. And so it's no longer under the Student Support Services team.
Oh, okay.
So I think we shared that. I don't know. I can follow up and let you know.
All right.
I can't remember if we shared that recently, but yeah, we can follow up.
Okay, please. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bondo. Other questions? Ms. Biliou.
Oh, you're good.
You can go. Go ahead. I'll call on Board Member Burke next.
Okay, I just have one question. Earlier, I think you said that it's sometimes hard indicating whether somebody needs special needs or if they're just like an English language learner. And you said you're having difficulty differentiating, or not differentiating, but figuring out who goes where.
Yeah.
Can you clarify?
Yeah. So we, I think Jesse, and you can elaborate, Jesse, but we have noticed this trend in the data that he mentioned, where there's this higher percentage of students who are English language learners that are getting referred. They're not necessarily getting found eligible once we do the formal evaluation. And so, and this is a thing that happens, nationally in districts, is this conflation between language and is this a disability?
Yep.
So we've added a new position this year who's focused very specifically on the systems and structures to decouple, the difference between disability and language. And so she's been working on things like assessment, as a starting point to better understand and make sure that when we're assessing students, if they don't yet have English language proficiency, that's not somehow influencing what we perceive and then make assumptions that they have like a learning disability. So this is the first year we've had that capacity. And so she's really building some of these structures. So I feel excited about kind of where we are and where we're moving. But as you can see in the data, it's not like all the way translated. Although I think it's a positive sign that ultimately who gets found eligible is proportional once we have our, specialists come in and evaluate.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted some clarification on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Ms. Biliou. Board Member Burke.
Thank you. I have a few questions. One is similar to a question that was just asked, but I'm going to ask it differently to see if you do perchance have the information. You were proposing addition of a social worker for the Breathe Day treatment program. So just curious how many students are being supported by the current 1.0 social worker across the two buildings.
Right. So, excuse me. So currently, the social worker, there's a social worker, one at Deering, and they are serving both the Breathe Support program and the Breathe Day treatment program.
Okay.
And that is, I believe, 25 students total.
Okay.
And so typically the social workers in Breathe are serving more like 11 or 12 students total. So they are serving sort of many more than they typically do. This person, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Second question about how many, it's a how many question. How many BCB do we currently have? And just like you just referenced, is there a ratio to reference for how many BCBAs per number of students is recommended?
Sure. So we currently have 2 full-time BCBAs on staff. One of them is assigned basically full-time to the Beach program. The other splits time between the functional life skills and the Breathe program. There isn't really a sort of a ratio the way you would think of for social work or for psychologists or something like that. But certainly just based on the needs of the students in those programs, we don't have the capacity to serve at that resource school level like we talked about. So that's where the request comes from. We just don't have that resource right now.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that that's clear to people, that what Jesse was talking about in that increase is to be able to serve everybody else. That's the ask there.
Thank you. Thanks for the punctuation. With the suspension, is there an issue with our approach to suspension in terms of policy or procedure, or all these suspensions that we're seeing in terms of the disparity between number of students that are within special education versus how many are being suspended? Are they quote unquote justified suspensions?
So are they, say that again?
So my question is, I heard that you want to make an investment in BCBAs in part to address the suspension issue, and that's both related to students within these programs, but you've just punctuated it's also building wide.
Right.
So my question is there a policy and procedure issue that is leading to the discrepancy in suspension that we were looking at in those charts?
I don't feel like I could give you a definitive answer to that.
Yeah.
I think that's this unpacking that we're trying to do. I mean, my sense is that students have behaviors that are justifiable in terms of the categories. And the big question is, what are we doing proactively and preventatively to de-escalate the situation and to provide the necessary support so it doesn't escalate into something that, might result in a suspension? So, I mean, that's kind of how I would answer that.
Let me can I try to also address it? I mean, I think that it's a good question. It's a hard question. I think that, we believe that that it's not a policy issue, right? That we have recently changed our suspension policy, and we're very comfortable with what that, with how that policy plays out. These numbers actually predate that policy for the most part. The overrepresentation of special education students in suspensions and expulsions is a national issue. So we're not outliers on that. And I think everything that you heard Jesse and Malia talk about today is a recognition of the fact that we shouldn't be okay with it just because it is elsewhere. It shouldn't be okay for us. And that is why we are, prioritizing in terms of what do we need to do, things like, the Crisis Prevention Institute training, things like the BCBA resource district-wide. And, that's all designed to address the concerns that we have about the fact that there are, a significant number of students with disabilities that are being, it's a disproportionate representation of students with disabilities in special education.
Okay, thanks. And another question is on the slide related to the NWEA proficiency or meeting proficiency. That was from 2021. Was that consistent with other years that aren't pandemic?
Yes.
Right, okay. And then do some of your proposed investments relate to changing what we're seeing in those charts? And if so, which one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we talked a little bit about this. I think one of the things that I would say, and you can add on to this, is that some of what we're trying to figure out with the district programs is getting those in a solid place, which includes and we're in the middle of finishing those work groups. So acknowledging that there are potentially additional proposals that are coming out of that. But our administration team's time, attention, and energy has been disproportionately focused in those areas. And so that's something that, we need to have Jesse and his team looking much more deeply and closely at, how are students doing in terms of getting access to the grade level curriculum and supports there. So that's one thing I would say is we want to get these programs in a good, solid place so that they aren't having to put all of their time there and not, frankly, putting much attention toward that other body of work. I do think that what's happening there is really more connected to the collaboration priority we have. And so, our broad priority one is giving all kids access to grade level learning with the appropriate supports and scaffolds. And so there's movement in the direction of how do we more strategically and thoughtfully do that side by side, so Jesse's at the curriculum team meetings. So those are the moves we made. It might result in resource recommendations. Last year, there was something that we proposed that didn't go forward in terms of a kind of more academically focused coach. But right now on that list, you saw, I don't think there's anything explicit about that other than capacity to free up other capacity to be more proportionally focused.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And my last question is about the billing, and you can punt this to when we get to the budget conversations, but it's clear that we're not going to meet projections for our main care revenue billing again, which has been a consistent fiscal pain point. And just curious if you'll be calling out in the budget process what the difference was in our projection versus our actual this year and what you're doing to adjust that moving forward.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, yes, we will be calling it out. And what it basically means is that we will not, in our budget, we won't be showing that as revenue, because we now have learned that we will not be able to realize that revenue. So basically, we're not making cuts to the program. So it basically means that we have, more general fund resource needed to be able to fund the same level of programming or any of the, increases that they've proposed.
So that line's zeroing out moving forward.
I mean, I don't think it's zeroing out, because I think that, we have a history of being able to, make Medicaid reimbursement claims as a district, but it's significantly reduced because it grew, significantly when we launched Breathe with a certain set of assumptions that now, after 3 years, we realize we're not going to be able to meet.
And can I just add one thing to that? I can't remember if you said this, but we have gone down a path of looking at if we added like a position to manage the billing, would that actually be worth it? Because then we could realize more of this revenue. Would it pay for itself plus some? And I think and that was actually where I thought we were going to go and come propose. The sticking point there is what Jesse mentioned about the sort of round hole square peg issue with the model. And so that's been something we've been unraveling and unpacking, but just this whole issue of, social worker has to be sitting in a session for X amount of time, where that's not really the model or how we want it to look. So there's these other issues that aren't even about all of the immense and precise paperwork, but are just how we actually run the program that we've come to discover our challenges.
Okay. So a follow-up question there. I mean, these are 6 and 7 figure issues. So is there some sort of advocacy that we should take up at the state level or to try to address that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it would be very helpful if the billing process took into consideration the school setting and the way things actually work there. Yeah, that would be, because then I think if it was designed in such a way that it made sense in the way schools run these types of programs, it would mean that it's easier to do. It might still mean we need some kind of management capacity, but again, that would probably pay for itself and then some if we were to go that direction.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks for everybody you brought together too. It's really helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Board Member Burke. Ms. Russell-Better.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you so much for all of this really useful information. I had a couple questions that were related to ones that my colleagues already brought up. So let me just think. So Mr. Burke, with the billing question, I guess my follow-up question on that was, so it sounds like, Malia, you're saying that programmatic change is really maybe what needs to be looked at to sort. You mentioned the possibility of the position that would be, taking on the billing piece, but that really it's also programmatically how to make that work because you're saying in the school setting, which as a social worker myself, having had to do billing with Maine Care, understanding that it's very complex, but that as an individual practitioner doing that, you can do it in that setting. So that does help me understand that in the educational setting, it's really not fitting what you need to do. So I'm hearing that it doesn't sound like there's anything budget-wise, since that billing position doesn't seem to resolve that. So there isn't really anything else with that issue today that you can say in our budget we could address?
Yeah, I mean, not today, but I think, I mean, it's something that I think we're still committed to. And there are some amount of the hours that can be billed, and then it becomes this question of sort of the return on investment for the time and all of that. But I'd say, yeah, right now, I don't think we'll come forward with that particular proposal, but I do think that it's something we're constantly looking into. Our director, Breathe, is currently out on leave. So just want to acknowledge that this is something he was actually the person delving into this and leading this work. So that caveat's out there, because once he's back, I think he has the deep understanding of all this.
Okay. But that is helpful to know what you mentioned about, at the state level, where can we advocate or have any conversation about this being a real barrier to getting this work covered because of the setting not working for your day-to-day positions and what their work looks like to get this paperwork and the bureaucratic piece done.
Right. And I think that, why that's really important from an advocacy perspective is, like, right now we're running a day treatment program in our district. Most districts don't do that, so they end up sending out of district, and then they end up getting a reimbursement from the state for that. So, I'd love to talk offline further about some things we could advocate for.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then my other question that was, Ms. Biliou was asking about the EL students being referred for special ed. And my question, I was just noting, I believe, I think in the slide, it was like 36% of EL students you're seeing are referred for special ed, but it sounds like what you shared was that the percent who end up being identified is really comparable to other populations, right? And then it was helpful, Lee, when you just shared a little bit more about the new dual identified coordinator and what that role is intending to do in reducing the number of referrals, correct? So I guess I'm just trying to understand, since I know that's new in the last year, like, will we be able to see data? So it sounds like, I guess, you're hoping to decrease the percentage that are referred. So I'm just trying to see, what else are you trying to see difference? Because it looks like you're saying that the percentage that actually end up getting or identified isn't really off. Is that correct?
We have had some disproportionality historically.
Okay, but maybe more recent years.
And in general, I think this is something that we don't have strong systems and protocols around. We just haven't had somebody focus on it. One thing, just to remind you, when Carlos came and did the update around the LAU plan, Maureen Fox joined, and she talked about this body of work. So she's the person we hired for that, and she kind of highlighted that work. I think that was a couple weeks ago.
And I guess in just saying this, I'm realizing that, of course, reducing the number of students identified is good, but also it is not referring them in the first place and reducing that process. Seems like that's part of the streamlining and trying to make sure that kind of teasing out the proficiency in English language should be a part of not having them go in that pathway.
Right. We don't want our teams to think that a student has a disability when it really is connected to their language, and bring them and their families through this whole process if it's not appropriate, of course. So
is there specific data being tracked, and is it about those numbers, or with this new position, like, what are you kind of hoping to see shift?
Yeah. Do you want to speak to that or not?
I think I would just point out, that number, the percentage of students who are referred, right? What we were saying is that a higher number of them than you expect, a higher percentage than you'd expect, are English learners. If that number were to decrease, what it would mean is that these students were getting the support that they needed, in the general education environment in the first place, and not being referred. So I think that number is important for that reason, because that's sort of what you would see. That's what you'd be seeing a result in.
Yep. And I also, just to your question about what's the outcome from that position. Yeah. The other side of it is, how are we serving students who are found eligible and who are duly identified? And an example of that is that we do have a requested ad that Jesse highlighted and Carlos highlighted as well, which is a 1.0 ELL teacher for students in district programs. So by having Maureen really dig in and look at this, she's already identified a gap, which is that if a student's an English language learner in Beach or Bridge, they are not currently getting services from the EL teachers that are based in those schools. And that's a highly specialized skill to work with an English language learner who's in some of these functional academic, at the functional academic level. And so like, that's an example of by having a person who's obsessed with this population of students, she's creating systems and structures at the referral stage, but then really she's looking at how do we actually serve those who are identified and have both of these needs.
Thank you. Yeah, that helps me put together what she presented or what I'm remembering. And then this piece of how do the students end up being started in the process. So thank you. Thank you. So the last question I have is just about CPI training, which I know has been around for quite a while and is respected. I just remember years ago doing it as a social worker in an agency. I'm just curious. I don't recall if anyone mentioned, are there staff that are currently trained in it? Like, was it decided because some staff are using it and have felt it to be, and also maybe just how it's regarded, but has it been kind of from within some staffs, wanting to expand it or like?
I can start this, but add on because this even kind of predated you a little bit, but yeah, and Chris, I think maybe like my first week on the job, Chris Salmoni and some others came to Javier and I to talk about, this topic in general. And so we've been trying to look at this in safety care for a while. We've done with Chris Reiger as well and Chris McCarthy, an evaluation of safety care versus CPI and a couple of others. And, I think one of the biggest observations and takeaways was that the percent of time in the training that's devoted to de-escalation and CPI is like significantly more as compared to safety care that might be more focused on the restraint component of it. So that's an example. We have charts and all this stuff when we were trying to hone in on which is the program that matches our values and priorities. As far as train, yes, we've had some trained staff, but Jesse, along with Chris, is leading a process where we are identifying, I think we had 8 or 10 trainers that were identified that went to a full Saturday course. They are then training teams. So every school has a team they've identified that is including administrators, and there's like a handful of people. So our trainers are training those teams, and then the teams at each school site will take the de-escalation piece out to the full building. They won't necessarily take all of the elements of CPI because you don't necessarily have to have everybody trained in every piece of it, but they'll be able to then bring the de-escalation component to the full staff. Did I get that all right?
Okay, great. So de-escalate, and I'm remembering that piece of. So that really feels like a piece of, because I think they have different probably trainings for different, positions or even education versus, I don't know if it's, for different disciplines, but so the de-escalation piece, it sounds like that training and the real practice of doing that, like with the situation social worker was sharing about that student, right? Like that's the piece that really feels like really aligns with what we're needing.
Right. And that will be universal.
Great. Yeah. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Russell-Better. Mr. Youssef.
Thank you. Thank you. I do have a couple of questions. You talk about the population of students with IEP increasing, and one of the reasons is pandemic. How is that, and how do we draw the line with students who have difficulty using technology?
Yeah, I'll try to answer the question. I think basically, and this is sort of the way I try to present it was kind of a theory. I'm not saying it's like a fully formed understanding of it, but I do think that students, it's just a fact that students missed out on in-person instruction they would have otherwise had, and I think it can be difficult to distinguish between a student has missed instruction. Is it related to disability? Is it related to the time that they weren't in school they would have been? But I think it could certainly get conflated. in some cases and lead to at least more referrals, even if the student isn't found eligible. And that's really kind of where that was going, was the idea of increased referrals with school teams or parents being concerned about students' performance. And, even if it's related somewhat to the pandemic, this is a way, like we said, to maybe get, intervention. So that's the concept.
Attendance, we talk about comparing to other students, they are lower, 3%. Do we have a specific measure for EIB students, or we just look at the data for the whole student?
Do you say that? So say the question again?
So their attendance, when they're lower, 3%.
Yeah.
Since their number is 17% smaller than the general student, do we have a different way of looking at those specific students with IEP and then following up why they were not there?
So we basically look at attendance overall, and then we disaggregate by, various groups. You've seen us show you before, including students that are the way we have it in our data system is special ed or not special ed. And so then from there, we might, observe a pattern it's not hugely disproportional. It's slightly disproportional. So then we're doing what we typically do to hone in and try to understand, where is this happening? Why is this happening? And what are the next steps? So I don't think that we have any specific different attendance strategy for students with IEPs. I think the opportunity we have there is oftentimes there's a lower staff to student ratio in terms of outreach and checking in and things like that. But correct me if I'm wrong, if there's anything else we do. Accurate. Yeah.
Thank you. One last question. Students, 2/3 of the students take the general classes, the general education. Some students may complain about the instructions, and some parents may have issues. When do we decide students don't need IEB anymore? And do that stays with them until they graduate?
Yeah. The IEP team, which includes the parent and the staff that work with the student, get together every year. And they determine what programs and services the student needs. So the team can always determine that, and it's great when this happens, that the student no longer needs those services and, no longer needs an IEP. That does happen. And then also parents, of course, have, the right to, discontinue special education services too. So that's another way that happens.
And I would just add one thing. It's, Jesse pointed out the higher percent of students coming in to K from pre-K who are identified. And I think that's a positive thing, because the early intervention is huge for, building up the skills, and sort of oftentimes students, if they have early intervention, might not need the same supports later on. So that'd be an example of a time where maybe a student starts with an IEP that they no longer need over time. And then there's some students, like a student maybe in one of these programs we talked about, who will probably always need the IEP to have the services that are tailored for their needs.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, the team. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Youssef. I don't see other questions from the board. I just have a couple of questions. And one is, I'm wondering what we're doing to adjust the fact that the number of referrals has been increasing, but the percentage of students found eligible is decreasing. I know you stated some theories, but I assume it's incredibly resource intensive to address the referrals and to determine eligibility. So I'm wondering what strategies we're pursuing to deal with that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the proposals we made for additional BCBA support and psychologists are directly sort of aimed at that. So the idea would be that by providing support before the referral process, before the referral is even made, by advising the intervention team, these professionals would, it would essentially help reduce referrals that are, probably not going to result in eligibility, and it would ensure that when referrals are made, it's after, appropriate robust intervention has been done and data has been collected. And that's where the resource focus, we'd like that to be, rather than, to your point, on, evaluating students, et cetera, after the fact.
And I just would add, I mean, we had a conversation about our coordinator positions and whether or not we needed to add one of those, and they really help oversee that whole process. And I think we'd rather move in this more proactive, preventative consultation direction than add more people who can kind of continue to manage all of these referrals coming in.
Thank you. My other question is about the Gifted and Talented program and the request that we add a 0.4 FTE. And I guess my question is just fairly basic. I'm wondering if you can explain how the Chapter 104 program fits in with our values as a district.
Do you want me to start that, or do you want? I guess the first thing I would say is that, I asked that question myself. So it's something that I grapple with to understand. Second thing I would say is that it serves students who have an exceptionality in terms of, this notion of gifted and talented. And so the way we've been thinking about it is that should be proportional to the student population, whether students are from low-income backgrounds, to students from different, various racial demographic backgrounds and whatnot. And, we've shared data before that looked at that, and it wasn't proportional, but that gap has been reducing based on some of the change in practice we've been doing. So I think the idea at this point is that it's a service that, anybody, no matter who, should receive if they are sort of so exceptional in a particular area that they really need that additional level of push and challenge. And so that's how we think of it. I know that a lot of people, and nationally, people have questions about the value of that program, but I think it's this idea that there are certain students that have an exceptionality in that way. And as long as that's proportional across the population, they need that additional level of service and support to push them. So I don't know if you want to say anything else about that.
Yeah, for me, it seems inconsistent with our values as we're identifying, I appreciate that Jesse said Chapter 104, but also said gifted and talented, and that we're identifying some kids as gifted and therefore everyone else is not gifted. And I think there's some literature now around the idea of labeling kids as gifted as playing into the elitism of, for instance, mathematics and creating, really fueling the idea that some kids can achieve and other kids can't. Some kids can achieve at a high level and other kids can't. So for me, I question whether it does fit into our overall values as a district in challenging all kids to achieve high standards. So I guess I am not enthusiastic about adding staff in the Gifted and Talented program, but we are required to run that program, right? By the state.
I believe we are. Yeah. I mean, I think that if it's something you're interested in looking at further, we should come back with a lot more data and information about the program and how we see that situated in the context of holding all students to high standards. I don't think it's in conflict with that idea, but this idea that some, there are particular students that are excelling beyond the high standards. I understand where you're coming from with that, but I do think it would be worth a deeper dive just on that program.
Do we know how many staff overall we have in the Chapter 104 program?
Yeah, not that many. How many is?
Yeah, we have 4.6 staff members currently.
And that's for whole district.
Right.
4th through 8th grade.
Yeah, 322 students total.
Okay. Thank you. Board Member Burke.
I'm sorry, I have one more question, and it's perhaps something you can follow up with me on, but I'm hearing the deference to the BCBAs as a key intervention in a lot of different things. And I'm curious what their competencies are, like a cultural competency, an equity competency. I look on the website, I don't see any statements that give me confidence that it's part of their praxis. And I'm just curious if you could give me more information at some point, that if we're going to kind of give that much power to those folks to shape what's happening in our buildings, that they're aligned with us in terms of what we're trying to accomplish and what we're trying not to reinforce.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we certainly could follow up on. I would just also say that we do, I mean, as you know, we do a lot of our own internal work around equity literacy because, you know, across a lot of positions, people aren't necessarily coming out of training programs that are focused on that skill and mindset to the extent that it's a priority for us. So I would say that's probably not unique just to that group's training. So it would sort of apply broadly in terms of who we're hiring. When we look at competencies, like an equity orientation is the number one competency we evaluate for, how we onboard, how we train, et cetera. But we could certainly follow up if we go further down that path.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions from the board? Okay. Okay. Malia and Jesse, thank you so much for this deep dive today. Or maybe it was a broad dive. Really appreciate really appreciate it. It's very helpful, and especially as we move into our budget process to contextualize the decisions that are going to be before us. So thank you so much. And I want to also thank all of the staff who joined us tonight and talked about their individual programs that brought our work to life and was inspirational. So thank you so much to everyone who joined us for this presentation.
I just wanted to also recognize Jesse. I think, you know, we really haven't had much of a chance for you to meet Jesse. He really has brought a very keen understanding of the importance of all students having access to high quality instruction that was deeply needed in this program. He also brings a strong data orientation. I think you saw that today. So I'm just really, really glad that you're here and continue to do great work. And I also want to extend my thanks to all of the folks that joined us on the presentation today. I see Katrin there. I know that Chris and Jacob and others are probably still, Nancy, with us. So thank you all for taking the time to be here. I know it's gotten late, so thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we are now on to old business. Consideration and action to approve the school year 2022-2023 calendar. Is there a motion? Ms. Russell-Better, seconded by Ms. Billiou. Thank you, Ms. Billiou. Mr. Superintendent, will you please speak to this motion?
Yes, Madam Chair. Tonight, we're asking you to approve the proposed calendar for school year 22-23. This calendar provides for 176 days of student attendance and 183 teacher days, 4 before the start of the school year and 1 at the end of the school year, with an additional 2 days built into the schedule for parent-teacher conferences that will vary across schools. Next year, school would start for students the day after Labor Day holiday, which is on September 6th, and the last day is projected to be June 14th for students, assuming that there are no snow days to pick up. Otherwise, there are no notable changes from this year. As many of you know, we're required by the Maine Department of Education to have no more than 5 different days with other school districts that send students to Portland Arts and Technology High School. So this calendar was developed jointly with other Cumberland County districts to conform to that set of specifications. We do publish a religious holiday calendar annually with guidelines for staff to follow that include allowing students to make up work when they miss school because of religious holiday, not to schedule major school activities on those days like Yom Kippur or Good Friday or Eid when students may be observing. And that calendar is also included in your packet for reference. I do want to note that last year the board passed a resolution directing us to continue to move toward a later start time for students in the upper grades, in the upper grade buildings. In the upper grades, building on what was done last year. You will notice that this calendar, which by the way, the school times is not something that needs, that is necessarily connected to the calendar, but because this is something that we publish and it goes on people's refrigerator, we include all of those things at the same time. But so you'll notice that this calendar reflects the current school year start times. As most of the board will remember, when we started the school year and discussed priorities, I indicated that I did not feel that we had the bandwidth to move that work forward this year. So we postponed that into next school year.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent. Are there questions from the board on the calendar? Board Member Burke.
I have one. Just curious if you'd say more about the first day of school, given this past year was quite advance of Labor Day and now shifting back to.
Right. I mean, I think this year we started, I don't remember exactly, but Labor Day was much earlier in the calendar. And so I think that's why we started that way. And traditionally, we've tried to start after the Labor Day holiday.
Yeah. Okay, seeing no other questions from the board, we're going to move to public comment. So this is public comment specifically on the calendar for the 2022-2023 school year. If there are any members of the public who would like to address the board, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Okay, I don't see any public comments, so I'm going to close public comment and move to board discussion. Is there any discussion, Mr. Board Member Burke?
The overeager kid with my hand up again. I just want to say that I appreciate the difficulties in taking up the resolution that we passed last year to move forward with a pretty robust process that we charged the superintendent with to develop school start times for middle and high schools. And I just want to read from the resolution that we had said that we wanted to move middle and high school students to begin no earlier than 8:30 a.m. and starting for elementary school students no earlier than 8 a.m. With full consideration of the implications for all levels of schooling, and that includes plans for transportation, co-curricular activities, work, and childcare of the various options, along with the financial implications of each option prior to the adoption of a school calendar in April 2022 for the 22-23 school year. And I just want to say I remain committed to this resolution. I think it was an important continuation of work that continually has difficulty taking root. We made an advance last year with changing middle and high school start times a little bit later, but there's more to do. And I fully acknowledge the humanness of trying to do all the different things we're trying to do to run a district this year. So just want to recommit my commitment to this resolution. Appreciate that it's going to be attended to. I have some disappointment that it's getting punted, but also understanding for that.
Thank you, Board Member Burke. Is there any other discussion? Okay, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you approve the school year 2022-2023 calendar. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo.
Yes.
Mr. Burke.
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better.
Yes.
Ms. Billy.
Yes.
Mr. Youssef.
Yes.
Ms. Diu.
Yes.
And Chair Figdor.
Yes. So the motion is unanimously passed and the 2022-2023 school year calendar is approved. Next, we're on to personnel items. Consideration and action to approve the personnel item listed, election of administrator. Is there a motion? Board Member Burke, seconded by Board Member Bondo. Mr. Superintendent, do you want to speak to this motion?
Yes, Madam Chair. Today, we're asking you to approve the appointment of Marisa Ayala as principal of Lincoln Middle School. I'm incredibly excited to have Marisa join the Portland Public Schools as Lincoln's incoming principal. Our Portland Promise goal commits us to working tirelessly to attract and retain the most talented and diverse group of educators possible. Marisa is an exceptional trilingual candidate whose work as a teacher and leader has centered diverse students in urban settings. I am enthusiastic about the tremendous value she adds to the work at Lincoln Middle School and to the district's administrative team as a whole. After a nationwide search, Marisa emerged from an initial pool of 18 applicants to be one of 3 finalists selected by a site-based interview committee with 12 Lincoln staff from a variety of roles and positions, 2 district administrators, and 3 parents. The committee also had a focus group made up of a diverse group of 6 students. Subsequently, Assistant Superintendents Townsend, Nally, and I interviewed the 3 finalists, and we were blown away by Marisa's commitment to being an anti-racist leader and the depth of her understanding of instruction and the principal's role in advancing quality learning for all students. Marisa is fluent in Spanish and also speaks French, and I'm excited to have our English, Spanish, and French students and families greeted at the door by a principal who speaks their language. She also holds a master's degree in school leadership from Harvard University and a master's degree in bilingual education and as a reading specialist from National Louis University. Marisa's bachelor's degree is in early childhood education from DePaul University. She currently serves as assistant superintendent in a K-8 building in the Boston Public Schools. She served as a principal intern in Boston, also at a K-8 school. Prior to that, she worked for the Chicago Public Schools as a bilingual teacher and then as an ESL bilingual program coordinator at several schools. Many of those experiences have been working with early adolescent students and the staff that serve them. Your packet has Marisa's resume and additional information about her hiring. She could not be with us today, but I look forward to introducing to her formally to you in coming weeks, should you approve her. She is scheduled to start at Lincoln Middle School on July 1st. I would like to express my gratitude and admiration for the work that interim principal Robin Bailey has done at Lincoln School this year. This, as we all know, has been a very challenging year and nowhere more so than at Lincoln. I have seen tremendous dedication and growth from Ms. Bailey and extend my gratitude, and I believe that of the entire Lincoln community for her work. I'm also grateful to interim assistant principal Kathy Marquis-Gerard, who we drafted out of retirement and has been a steady influence and a great partner to Robin and all of us this year. So with that, I would like to recommend Marisa Ayala for the principal at Lincoln Middle School.
Thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent. Are there any questions from the board? Seeing none, there's no public comment on personnel items, so we're going to move right into board discussion. Is there any board discussion? I'm going to go to Board Member Burke. I saw Board Member Burke first and then Ms. Bondo.
I'll just say I'm going to enthusiastically vote in support of this recommendation. From what I've heard and read about Marisa is very encouraging and feels like we're incredibly fortunate to have her join our district, and I look forward to her leadership. And I think my kids perhaps attending middle school with her in a couple of years. So thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Burke. Ms. Bondo.
Yes, I just want to echo what my colleague just mentioned, but I think just giving to the reflection when I sponsor the equity policies, that how we really building that culture inclusion on the leadership position. And I think we're moving to the right direction. We still have a lot of to do, but I think it's really a reflection of student body and how we want to advance equity and our community strength. So I'm really in support on voting for the position. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bondo. I don't see any other board discussion, so I just wanted to add that I'm very enthusiastic about this candidate and will happily support her tonight. I also want to say that I think it says a lot that we have someone coming from the Boston Public Schools and Chicago Public Schools to Portland to be a part of what we're doing here as we work to become an anti-racist district. So I do think it's a testament of the superintendent's leadership as well as his cabinet and all of the work that we are doing to transform our district and to have equity at the center of what we're doing. Congratulations to the team and to Ms. Stoddard, who I know, of course, leads our recruitment. Very enthusiastic to vote tonight on this nomination. So with that, we're going to go forward with a vote. So please indicate whether you approve the personnel item listed, election of administrator. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Russell-Better?
Yes.
Ms. Biliu?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Ms. Diu?
Yes.
And Chair Figdor?
Yes. So the item is unanimously approved.
And can I just take one moment to give a special thanks to Assistant Superintendent Townsend, who led this process from beginning to end. This is an incredible lift to be able to bring all of the group of people together to first craft the competencies and what it is that we want in the leader, and then to be able to help with all of the recruitment and management of that, and then actually lead people through a very thoughtful process. And I think Aaron has done an extraordinary job on that in the past, and most certainly has with this. So thank you very much, Aaron, for your work on that.
Excellent. So with that, we are ready to adjourn. I just want to note that our next meeting is 2 weeks from today on Tuesday, March 15th. We'll be meeting here at Casco Bay High School as well as on Zoom in our blended format. And we're ready to adjourn. So is there a motion? Mr. Youssef, seconded by Ms. Biliu. All in favor, just with a show of hands. It's unanimous. We are adjourned at 9:31. Thank you so much, everyone. Good night. Have a restful evening.